So the end of the 1980s is really going to be so. At the end of Reagan's administration, he's ramped up the pressure on the Soviet Union. He's been tainted by the Iran-Contra scandal. You still see the economy's doing okay. It's slowed down some from kind of the boom period of like '85, but it's still doing okay. And there's kind of this sense of, do we really want to change? But some of the criticisms about the handling of the AIDS crisis and the failure of the Reagan administration to address that. Concerns about kind of the wealth gap and kind of the how the urban areas, the drug wars. So there's some criticisms of Reagan. Plus, it's very clear that maybe he's not as sharp as he used to be. And of course, what we know now is that he was starting to have Alzheimer's. So in 1988, his vice president, George H.W. Bush, is going to run for president. You will have, interestingly, Jesse Jackson will kind of he'll run as a third party. He won't get a lot of traction, but he will attempt to run. And Bush will resoundingly defeat Michael Dukakis. Now, part of how he does that is through he does this ad where he talks about the furlough program that Dukakis had ushered in Massachusetts, and he's basically like, well, this African American guy, was on furlough and he killed these two people, and it's all Dukakis's fault, right? And this commercial is known because that they portrayed this guy. They showed this really dark picture where his complexion was really dark. It was clearly playing to racial concepts. And of course, guess who created it? Roger Ailes and Karl Rove. Roger Ailes, of course, who becomes part of Fox News. And so George H.W. Bush kind of hung out with some pretty shady conservative characters. Yeah. So he, I like Bush 41. He was a very honorable guy, but he was not above letting other people do some dirty work. And, so I think it's fair to kind of acknowledge that. Most people want a continuation of Reagan's policies. And so he's going to come in, he's going to basically promise. People are very concerned about the deficit because, remember, Reagan's been spending all this money on the military. And he says, read my lips, no new taxes. I'm not going to raise taxes. Except in 1988, the Democrats get control of Congress. So in order to do anything, he's going to have to negotiate with Congress. And this is going to create huge problems for him. Because he's ultimately going to have to agree to raise some taxes in order to cut some spending. And then that's going to cost him the 92 election. And so you have the Soviet Union collapses. And the Berlin Wall comes down in 1989, right after he wins the election. And so that's going to be kind of significant. You're going to have the Soviet Union will completely collapse in 1991. This is where Putin kind of starts to come to power. And so you have that happening. You've got China, which had kind of opened up for trade very quickly. You have some demands for free speech, and they kind of clamped down on that. So if you've heard, I don't know, you might have heard something about it because of the Hong Kong protests. But the Communist Party clearly maintains control. Panama is another issue. Persian Gulf War is the big one. Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait, largely because there'd been this whole conflict between Iran and Iraq. That war was over and he needed money. And so he says Kuwait is stealing Iranian oil. And so he invades Kuwait, and the United Nations says, no, you didn't. And so the U.S. leads this coalition and really is kind of like in and out in like 3 or 4 months. It's really pretty fast. And the problem with that is that you're going to start to see a slowing economy, this deficit. And so, of course, he raises the taxes, and that's going to hurt him. Americans with Disabilities Act is signed during this period. And, of course, the rise of the computer and the internet in the way that we begin to know it. Lots of changes with medicine. So society is going to go under a lot of changes going from, say, 89 to approximately 92. And so we'll see this kind of new kind of system that begins to emerge. Now, one of the issues that we'll start to see in the 90s is this rise of third-party candidates, right? Namely H. Ross Perot, who just passed away a few months ago. He's going to run in 1992, basically starting this kind of anti-tax, kind of far-right Tea Party. We don't want taxes. We don't want regulation. We don't want government services. We don't want government programs. Just a huge rejection of that. So, not even kind of Reagan level kind of, well, we want to reduce those things, but we don't want to get rid of them completely. Ross Perot wants to get rid of them. So he's what you would call a libertarian, right? And so H.W. Bush is running as the incumbent. Bill Clinton runs as a Democrat. He's claiming to be a new type of Democrat and really kind of comes after Bush for the slowing economy, which, is not entirely fair because he's, a lot of those policies were put in place under Reagan. But you definitely have Bush 43 taking the hit. Perot has a pretty good turnout, which probably is why Clinton won, because he probably pulled too much support from Bush, although it's kind of hard to say for sure. So Clinton's going to take office, right? Doesn't necessarily he has the electoral majority, but doesn't have the popular vote. And he's going to come in with the idea to stimulate the economy. He's going to try to reduce military spending, reduce the deficit. Hillary leads the healthcare task force, right? Which creates a lot of backlash against Hillary Clinton. And ultimately, this is going to lead to, so the Republican Party will come up with a bill or a plan for health care that actually is almost exactly like the Affordable Care Act. So what's ironic about kind of the feelings about the Affordable Care Act today is that was actually the 1990s Republican plan. So basically it's not about the plan, it's about who delivers it. So Hillary starts to really become vilified in this period. Part of it is that Clinton campaigned with, oh, you're going to get Hillary Clinton, who's so talented, and you're going to get me. She's almost going to be like a first lady, like a first female president, right? And so a lot of those religious conservatives are going to push back against that. They're going to feel like Hillary is too liberal. She represents that second wave feminism. So there's going to be kind of some resentment towards Hillary that starts during this 1990s period. With women, you do have they kind of talk about a maternity leave. The best they get is a Family Medical Leave Act, but that's unpaid. So if you have to take off because you have a sick child or something, you can be guaranteed to have your job within a certain frame of time, but you won't get paid for it. Gun control becomes a thing. Mothers Against Drunk Driving becomes a thing during this period. Actually, a little bit before this, but you have, drinking age is raised to 21. You have gun control becoming an issue. But Clinton faces a lot of attacks by conservatives. And so the Republicans will get control of Congress in 1994. And you will start to have this idea of a balanced budget and welfare reform and tax reform. Lots of budget showdowns taking place. So you get to 1996, and Clinton runs again against Robert Dole, and he will be reelected because he's highly popular. Remember, he's still fairly conservative. He especially became more conservative after the 1994 midterms. So he's really kind of, he's not a classically liberal Democrat. And, he focuses on trade relations with China and Vietnam. They do expand children's health insurance and that kind of thing. We end tobacco advertising. He does balance the budget in part because they sue the tobacco companies and they get a big bunch of money from that. The big kind of aspects of Clinton's second term, you're going to have two. One's domestic, one's foreign. The domestic one is going to be the perjury scandal, the fact that he had an affair with Monica Lewinsky in the White House. And lied about it under oath. And this is all part of going back to the first term. The Republicans had launched an investigation into some Arkansas land dealings while he was governor. And so they're digging and digging and digging. They can't find anything. And it's kind of like everything with the Clintons. It doesn't quite pass the smell test, but it's not clear. It's not illegal. And so they keep looking for something and they uncover this affair. And so then they ask him about it under oath and he lies. And then they have proof that he really did have an affair. And so they actually draw up articles of impeachment. against him because he committed perjury. So kind of ironic since we're talking about impeachment with Trump. And, so just kind of interesting, kind of the comparisons between the two. So he survives the impeachment thing. So this is going to make him kind of, not very popular in the 2000 election. And in fact, his legacy is very complicated, in part because, he clearly abused his power over Monica Lewinsky, clearly lied under oath, which is breaking the law. And he moved to the right. He was very conservative. He doesn't necessarily espouse progressive issues. And that's just kind of how he is. He's, when he's around, you have the problems in Bosnia and Serbia with ethnic cleansing. You're going to have in Somalia, I think it is, with the Black Hawk Down, whatever that movie's about. That takes place under Clinton. You're going to have also taking place the first World Trade Center attack is going to happen, and they kind of dropped the ball on that one. So lots of interesting things. We will have the first female Secretary of State in Madeleine Albright. So we start to see women kind of taking these roles. We have lots of global trade agreements. So this is going to be one of the things that's very critical. And our first attempts to kind of resolve global warming. The 2000 election is going to be largely George W. Bush 41's son, who was governor of Texas. He runs for the Republicans. Al Gore, Clinton's vice president, is going to run. But again, Clinton's not very popular. So that's going to limit Gore. Ralph Nader is going to represent kind of the far left, the more left-leaning part of the party. And so you'll have essentially the election. No one has enough electoral votes, and this is going to lead to the Bush v. Gore decision, where when does Florida stop counting their ballots, right? And so ultimately, the Supreme Court's going to come in and tell them, okay, on this date you have to stop counting, and it's on that date that George W. Bush has the majority of votes, and so he gets Florida's electoral votes, and so that's kind of why the 2000 election is a bit disputed over that. And the economy begins to slow down a lot. You'd had computers and technology really booming in the 90s. And so that begins to slow down. It kind of become a stock bubble, right? And so Congress passes this big tax cut to kind of stop the recession. He comes up with a No Child Left Behind, which is a lot of testing and assessment based. But then you have 9/11 happen, right? And 9/11 takes place, and that changes everything. Creates the War on Terror, creates the Office of Homeland Security, creates the Patriot Act, Guantanamo Bay. We'll go into Afghanistan in 2001, and then we'll go into Iraq in 2003. So Bush's administration is really going to be shaped by those particular aspects, especially his first term. He will win the 2004 election against John Kerry. If you follow kind of conservative politics, they use a lot of kind of the dirty, what we would call trolls and kind of the labels, and you start to have the influence of kind of Fox News against John Kerry, and you start to have, and so Bush is going to win. It's going to be pretty tight in the sense that Bush ekes out that kind of victory. If he'd lost Ohio, he would have lost the election, right? His second term, is basically you've got, Hurricane Katrina is a big one, right? That kind of destroys that. You've got lots of issues with the Supreme Court, and then a major economic recession is going to take place in 2008, and so that's kind of his second term, right? So a lot happens, but it's nothing particularly very good. So 2008, of course, will bring in Barack Obama. He'll win 2012. Under Obama, you have the Affordable Care Act, this idea of kind of providing health care. I think I mentioned before, that's the conservative plan. We have the Great Recession and its recovery, which was incredibly slow. And, in fact, you could argue that it didn't really finish recovering until about 2017. And so Trump can't really take credit for that because he just become president, although he does take credit for it. At best, I think you could say that businesses felt kind of like, oh, hey, Trump's president, he's going to let us do whatever we want. So you might have had a little enthusiasm from businesses to kind of finish off the recovery. But it was definitely a very long, slow thing. But if you think about the Great Depression, it took about 10 years to recover from that. And the recession of 2008 was as significant as the Great Depression. It just wasn't quite as much unemployment. You start to have lots of questions about privacy, the BPA oil spill, lots of green technology. So those things are going to happen. The big thing is the Defense of Marriage Act that Clinton had signed that said that marriage was between a man and a woman. So LGBTQ, talking in the sense of gender. So that's going to start to expand civil rights for that group of people. But you have lots of other kind of interesting problems and kind of the rise of this conservatism. And so it just, we start to have a lot of issues going into the 2000s. So Obama's presidency, again, I think I've mentioned, you've got the end of the Voting Rights Act. Or the kind of the nullification of part of the Voting Rights Act. And you've just got the rise of social media as a major development of the 21st century. And, what has that done to our politics? What has having this cable news and Fox News, what has that done to the political discourse? And so there's lots of interesting questions that come out of this context. Now, obviously, some of the more important 21st century things like for women, like the Me Too movement, for instance, is a big part of that. Protections against rape. That has become much more of a hot button issue during this time period. And under Obama, we certainly see that coming to the forefront. But, if you're talking about generally speaking with Obama's policies, they're very much about trying to restore the economy and trying to fix that, as well as trying to respond to kind of global situations. And then just dealing with the polarization of our society. And so, how do women factor into that? Well, a lot of it's going to be that they're a part of these groups. I don't think it's until the Me Too movement that you can start to really talk again about women being actively kind of coming into the news. Yes, Hillary Clinton runs for president in 2008. And when she runs for president in 2008, and again in 2016, that's important because it's important that we had a female presidential candidate. I think Hillary Clinton was problematic. She was never very well liked, not by the general public, anyways. I don't think. And so that kind of creates a problem with her candidacies, both in 08 and in 16. And then, of course, she ends up losing, and we have Trump. And so now she's not she's still around. But, again, kind of points to some of the challenges that women have. This is a talented, capable woman who, because she doesn't come off the right way, people dismiss her. And you look at somebody like Richard Nixon, who didn't come off very well, and people were okay with him. So kind of some interesting kind of differences about how women are treated and some of the double standards. But I think that in view of Trump, with the Me Too movement and with women being much more actively engaged in running, we've had record numbers of women going for political offices, that may be changing, right? We may finally be starting to see more fair representation of women in kind of the halls of power. And maybe one day we'll start to address issues about economics and about women's roles and that sort of thing. So hopefully this context will help you. We'll go into a little more detail on women in class and make sure everything's kind of cleared up.